life at the Burrow was as different as possible from life on Privet Drive. The Dursleys liked everything neat and ordered. The Weasleys' house burst with the strange and unexpected.
The Belated Binge Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Belated Binge Podcast. I'm Zach, your host, revisiting some of the most iconic series in recent memory that I was incredibly late on, like our current binge of Harry Potter, where, despite being the same age as movie Harry, I didn't read this series through until my mid-20s. That's the belated part. Now we're going back a chapter or two at a time, picking it apart, deep diving what's on the page, speculating about what isn't, particularly Dumbledore's role and his master plan. What did he know? When did he know it? And the motivations guiding the story, and of course, also infusing as much sarcasm as humanly possible. That's the binge part. Together, they make the belated binge, and today we continue our reread of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets with Chapter 4 at Flourish and Blotts. Before we get into it, this podcast will have spoilers. This series wrapped up in 2007. If you haven't read them by now, you are even later than I was. This podcast will also have adult language. You can buy them in the kids section of the bookstore, but I didn't read them until, say it with me, I was a grown-ass man. No patron shoutouts this week. Special announcement, though, in case you missed it last week, I'm happy to announce that we'll have our first of the season? Yeah, that's right. The first special guest of the season, first ever in Chamber of Secrets, if you will, on the podcast next week. His name is Garrett. We worked together in a past life. He currently manages a couple of radio stations. He's a sports talk host, and he also has a podcast called the Rankum Podcast. He wears a ton of different hats, including a giant pointy one, because he's a total Potterhead. I expect a fair amount of cursing, as much laughing as we can get out of it, a lot of borderline inappropriate humor, and a lot of getting sidetracked. And I'm excited about it. But that's next week. We're not there yet. So, in case you were obliviated or you got your Hogwarts letter late, last chapter, Fred and George and Ronald Bilious Weasley flew an enchanted car across the country to break Harry out of Dursley Jail, cell block 4 on Prison Drive. Everything went off without a hitch, from breaking the bars off the window to picking locks and getting Harry's stuff from his old cupboard under the stairs. They avoided capture from Vernon after Hedwig screeched and woke him up when they nearly left her behind, I must mention. And somehow, nobody saw any of this shit going down because apparently flying sedans are normal in this particular suburb. But of course, they get caught by Molly MI7 Kids Weasley when they touch down at the Burrow. She yells. She still feeds them like kings and makes them do chores until Arthur comes home and she turned her attention to him for enchanting the car in the first place. But we can't move on to this week's chapter until we close the book on our last chapter, which means we have to recap our
Expecto Plot Change-O.
This is the part of the show where we theorize on what would happen if we change just a small part of our story. What do we expect that ripple effect to be? Last chapter, I asked, what if Vernon woke up sooner and was able to stop Harry from escaping with the Weasley brothers? And we got some feedback on Twitter from the Nerd Blitz with Doom and Fitz. Shout out to them, and they expect that it would be something possibly similar to what happens in Goblet of Fire. And by that, they mean they expect the Weasleys would have shown up and rescued him. Hell, maybe even Dumbledore himself. And I think that they're onto something. From my perspective, this actually should have happened. When they jerked the bars off the window, have you ever heard metal bars forcefully pulled out a brick? I don't think I have either. But I have heard it pull out of other hard stuff like concrete and other metal, or a metal drill going through concrete or brick. It's loud is kind of what I'm getting at. It sort of resembles nails on a chalkboard, except it's industrial-sized nails on a Hagrid-sized chalkboard. My point is it's not quiet. And not only should Vernon have heard the bars being pulled off and clanging to the ground, so would their neighbors. So let's play that out just a little bit. Vernon wakes up, catches them before they can get Harry's trunk or Hedwig. So what does Harry do? Does Harry jump in the car without any of his stuff and just buy all new stuff, including an owl? Sorry, Hedwig. When he gets to Diagon Alley? Possibly. But I don't think it's in character. I think our little hero complex carrying preteen would go the self-sacrificial route. He'd push Ron back in the seat and yell for them to drive away and leave him behind as Vernon is grabbing a hold of him. So how's he get to Hogwarts? Does he get to Hogwarts? Of course he does. He's Harry fucking Potter. So, how? How does he get there? Molly said that she and Arthur planned to get him if he didn't respond by Friday that week. Maybe they show up, and that's potentially hysterical. Molly Weasley confronting the Dursleys as she's taking Harry away from their lack of care. That's a scene that I want. I also like the idea of Dumbledore coming to retrieve Harry himself. Maybe we get a prequel or an expedited version of him beating the Dursleys over the head with alcohol that we're going to get to in Book 6. Although this is Dumbledore and he and Harry aren't friends yet, so he probably just sends Hagrid. Round 2 for the Three Little Pigs? I'd take any of those scenarios, to be honest, and I might find them more believable than what actually happened. So I'm pretty much right on the same page here with the Nerd Blitz with Doom and Fitz. So now, that wraps up last chapter's Expecto Plot Changeo, which means we need to do one for this chapter. So let me get my little selfie situation started here. And this week's Expecto Plot Changeo question from Chapter 4 of Chamber of Secrets at Flourish and Blotts is, what happens to Harry if Hagrid isn't randomly in Nocturne Alley at the very moment that Harry needs help? Let me know your thoughts to be included on the next episode of the podcast. Now, this little video that I just shot will be posted on social media across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and the TikTok. You can respond with your thoughts on any of those platforms or as a voicemail on my website, belatedbinge.com. Now, we shall dive into the events of this week's chapter with
Priority. Incan chapter.
We've reached the point where our wands connect. Not the tips, just the streams, so we can recap what went down in the chapter we just read. This week, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 4 at Flourish and Blotts begins with Harry describing, as our narrator, how much different the burrow was from Cell Block 4 on Prison Drive. He's taking the reader through some quirky things about the Weasley's house, and I just want to spend a second trying to imagine what this is like. So here we go. Role play. I'm 12 years old, which is how literally no role play should ever start. If so, grab your shit, run away, and call the cops. Anyways, in this role play situation, it's perfectly acceptable to start with. I'm 12 years old. I've been living with my abusive aunt and uncle my entire childhood. I've been mistreated and lied to about everything whimsical and literally anything about who I am. I'm 1 year removed of learning about this magical world that was hidden from me my entire life, and since then, I have found out I'm rich, I belong to a secret society, I attended a mind-blowing new school full of gifted children, and I also saved the fucking world at 11 years old. Alright, now I just sound like the author, reminding you what happened in the first book of this series, as if you didn't read it or listen to the first season of this podcast. But I say all of that to set things up and to ultimately say this. All of that is true. Magic is still new for Harry, but you could easily assume that after Hogwarts, it's hard to imagine a whole lot of surprises are left. It's kind of like being taught how to drive and being immediately entered into a NASCAR race, or taking one swim lesson and being thrown off the high dive. But for Harry, this is the first time he's ever been in a magical home. Not a giant boarding school, but a house where normal people live and kids grow up. They have dinner. They do chores. There's a talking mirror and a ghoul in the attic. And most of all, there's love in this house. He doesn't know what a loving family looks like in the muggle world. Now, add in magic and the fact that this family not only loves each other, but they all seem to care for him. And he's literally never experienced that. I'm imagining these scenes with Arthur, talking about just random muggle shit, or the first couple times Molly treated him as if she would her own son, and he experienced what having a mother in his life should actually look like. It's got to be overwhelming, right? And then letters from Hogwarts arrive, including Harry's, and we get this quote: "Dumbledore must know you're here, Harry. Doesn't miss a trick, that man." From Arthur. And we're going down another rabbit hole, so strap in. How did Dumbledore know Harry was at the Burrow, and what does the process of sending these letters even look like? Like, logistically speaking, how did Harry's letter get here? If you hadn't noticed yet on this podcast, I know the answer to every single question can always be magic. Whatever. That's not interesting to me. I want to pick it apart. I want to try to figure it all out. Not like the quantum mechanics of magical energy and its manipulation of atoms and whatever the hell other big words and science stuff that I don't understand the definition of would be. I mean the characters, their motivation, their arc, the purpose, and the impact on the story that's unfolding beyond names on a page, and looking at the events that unfold beyond saying it's magic. Now that I've cleared up nothing, let's break this down. If you can remember back to about 2 minutes ago, I asked 2 questions. First, how did Dumbledore know Harry was at the Burrow? One possibility, Mrs. Fig. She saw he wasn't at the Dursleys anymore, and Dumbledore knew Ron and Harry were friends, so maybe, hell, I don't know, maybe old Figgy even saw the flying car prison break scene. She's a crazy cat lady whose job it is to spy on Harry. Who's to say she's not also a night owl? By the way, who's she spying for? Dumbledore. Easy to figure out that that's how he knew. Another possible layer is, if you subscribe to my MI7 Kids theory, is that he intended for Harry to be pseudo-adopted by the Weasleys. He may have even planned for it. So if Harry ends up not being at the Dursleys when he's supposed to, I think Dumbledore has enough to go off of to figure out that he's with the Weasleys. Next question, what does the process of sending these letters look like? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that they're signed by Professor McGonagall, right? Fact check me on that. But in my head, there's literally no way she's actually writing them. She's way too important to be doing that nonsense. Does Hogwarts have an administrative staff of some kind? Here's a theory. House elves, with their own version of a quick quotes quill that we later learn Rita Skeeter has, which is basically the way it works is it does the writing for you, and hers is designed to embellish, but I would bet that these quick quotes quills would have their own purpose and their own flair, I guess you could say, their own leanings of what they were designed to do, I guess, as the pen of the thoughts, and how I'm losing my train of thought. Honestly, I need my own quick quotes quill. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't think all of them would work the same as Rita Skeeter's, where it stretches the truth and basically writes shit that doesn't even happen. And ultimate embellishment, I think that you would almost magically program them to achieve your specific goal for what they're supposed to be writing for you. I feel like none of that actually made sense, so let's get back on track here. I would think that for these house elves, they would be designed for accuracy of book lists and student records. You know, their grade, their address, their class schedule, and then the letters are run through Prof. McGee's office, who then signs them as like a stamp of approval, and then they go out. Right? So if that's the case, if I'm not completely off base, Dumbledore and Prof. McGee, they've been tight since whatever, the 20s, if you think that the Fantastic Beasts are canon, but we'll say for roughly 3 decades now for this particular book canon, before, people start yelling at me. Dumbledore would have just walked down to Professor McGonagall's office, told her to change the address on Harry's letter, and it's all set. So I guess this rabbit hole is really a rabbit ditch, because there's not a whole lot of digging we need to do. Anyway, so this is part of the chapter where we see the book list that includes every book Gilderoy Lockhart has apparently ever written, and we get a glimpse into the economic hardship that raising 7 kids on one middle-class income, even with magic, it's not easy. It's not gonna be easy. There's no way. We also see another nod to Ginny's big crush on our little hero in training when he asks her if she'll be going to Hogwarts this year, which feels a little strange to me, but maybe he doesn't know exactly how old she is. Whatever. She just turns as red as her hair and nods because she literally can't speak around him. If only she was a seer and could catch a glimpse down their future together. Hey. We get a letter from Hermione, who's still kind of annoying at this point, but in a loving way now, rather than a kind of way. And the kids all head up the hill to take turns riding Harry's broom and practicing Quidditch, because apparently they don't if they don't fly too high, they can hide like behind the trees and muggles can't see them. And apparently, once again, the magic trace doesn't count for flying a broom. Now, I'll say this is consistent with the rules as we know them, but I will also say this again. The rules seem a little loose and kind of, technically, aspect of magical law, in my personal opinion. Oh well. We also get another hint that Percy is acting weird this summer. He's locked in his room all the time and not really engaging with the family. Red herring alert! And now, it's time for the main event of our chapter. Floo powder. And after making Molly look kind of dumb when she doesn't realize that Harry's never used the Floo network. Duh. And that's not the last time that I'm going to be annoyed with how she's written in this section of this book. But whatever. Harry watches Fred throw the powder into the fire, walk in, disappear. Voila! Floo powder. Molly starts to explain how all this shit works, and Arthur cuts her off so that we can have trial by fire. Literally. And Harry goes after Arthur. Molly and Ron are just continuing to shout tips and tricks. Keep your elbows in and don't get out too early and whatever else. We know where this is going before it happens. We all know. It's going to go bad. It has to go bad. Because they didn't tell him anything. He has no idea what he's doing. How it goes bad, though? Well, that's another story. He coughs on flu powder, and as he's saying where he wants to go, Diagon Alley, he ends up in the wrong place. But here's the rub, which is also going to come up later. How the hell does stuttering Diagon Alley translate to Nocturne Alley in literally any scenario? The movie tries to address this a little bit by making Harry say diagonally, which is also the wordplay for Diagon Alley. Woohoo, good for you. But even that doesn't make sense, because unless we're supposed to believe that this form of transportation doesn't require an actual destination, and that Nocturne Alley is located directly diagonal from the burrow, and it just guessed how far he wanted to go. I don't know. I don't buy it in either scenario, but it's in the story, so that's where we are. That's where we're going. Of course, Harry has no idea where he is. He just fell out of a fireplace and broke his glasses. And again, the whole shouting, don't get out too soon. Wait till you see Fred and George. Like, he didn't have choices here, right? He just jumped in the fire, flew around, and then got thrown out of it. So could he have still gotten out in the right place? Or was he just doomed to show up in Nocturne Alley no matter what? Ultimately, the why the author brought us here becomes apparent very quickly. This is clearly a place with some creepy shit in it. And then we see Draco. And Harry hides in a cabinet, which you can bet your ass we're going to talk about more in the Divination segment of this podcast. Harry sees Draco's dad come in, and the Malfoys together are selling some of their creepy shit, so they don't get caught in a raid. Because I've heard that possession is 9/10 of the law, and apparently that's true in the wizarding world too. Draco's talking shit the whole time. Lucius is annoyed, and he's a shitty dad. And here's the Draco's apologists' ammunition for their argument outside of their collective crush on Tom Felton, where Lucius is a shitty dad, so Draco is not responsible for any decisions he makes ever. Whatever. Harry sees a couple more objects that are very key to the series that will also come up later in the opal necklace and the hand of glory that Draco asks his dad for when he starts getting berated about being a thief and how if his grades don't improve and he doesn't stop getting beat by a filthy little mudblood like Hermione Granger in classes at magic school, he might as well be a thief because he's not going to be worth a shit in life either way. I wasn't saying that Lucius wasn't a shitty dad. Totally is. Anyways, Harry, fumbles around, does his thing. When Harry gets out of the store, he literally thinks he's about to be kidnapped by a creepy lady in an alley. Before Hagrid rescues him, of course, and hauls him off to Diagon Alley, where he was supposed to be in the first place. Thankfully, Hagrid was looking for whatever, flesh-eating slug repellent, or whatever it was called. He sees Hermione first, and she doesn't fix his glasses. In the first book or the second, she doesn't fix his glasses. But the rest of the Weasleys follow, and Arthur actually does. And we're headed to the bank, and Arthur mentions how he'd really like to get Lucius for something, because he's really intrigued that Harry saw him, offloading some of his stuff, and he's like, ooh, he's worried. Yeah. It's kind of like the detective thinking that he's about to get the bad guy for something. And this is where Molly says to be careful and not to bite off more than he can handle or chew or whatever analogy she uses. I don't know. But I bring this particular because it's kind of a useless throwaway line, except Arthur responds with, what, you don't think that I'm a match for Lucius Malfoy? And that seems a little not Arthur, right? A little defensive. And I bring it up because it's important for his mindset later on in this chapter. For now, we're getting money from the bank, and he, meaning Arthur, wants to take Hermione's parents to the bar to undoubtedly pester them with questions about muggle shit because he sees them exchanging muggle money for wizard money, and he gets giddy. Here's where we get a bit of a kick in the gut next. For the Weasleys, they're broke. I mean, we knew that, but now we've seen their vault. And we see Harry's vault, who is very much not broke, and he's like trying to be super stealthy and kind of block the doorway or whatever and scoop some money in a bag real quick so they don't see, hey, this kid that we're taking care of feeding food off of our table is absolutely loaded. Now, a ton of people bag on Harry for not giving the Weasleys money. I get it. But he's also 12. And when you're 12, how do you walk up to grown-ass adults and say, hey, I noticed you're poor and you're taking care of me, so to reciprocate, I'd like to pay you from my pile of generational wealth? And then what scenario does the caring adult tell the 12-year-old, it's about time, you little rich shit? This doesn't happen in this book or any, probably. Maybe Harry should have tried harder, sure. But even in Goblet, when he wins the Triwizard Cup money, he tries to give it to Molly, and she won't take it. She's never going to take it from his savings account. It's not happening. So give it a rest. Anyway, the crew breaks into pods for an hour so that they can go shopping and do whatever. The next thing that actually matters in the chapter is when they meet back up at the bookstore, Flourish and Blotts. A name we've heard, Gilderoy Lockhart, is doing a book signing, and Hermione gets all excited. And Lockhart spots Harry in the crowd, snatches Harry up for pictures, and we can immediately tell that this guy is a total attention-seeking tool. He makes a big deal about how together they're worth the front page, and then he makes another big deal about announcing he'll be teaching defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts, and then makes another big deal about giving Harry free books, and you get the point, right? Everything this guy does and says and thinks and will ever be is such a big fucking deal. Not my favorite storyline in this book is this particular character, but whatever. He, meaning Harry, gives the free books to Ginny, which does help save the Weasleys some money, and before he can go buy his own books, Draco shows up, just to be a dick. Ginny stands up for Harry, which is a baby Ginny badass moment. Ron walks up, and Draco just continues laying into them like the bully that he is, talking relentless shit about how they don't have money. Awesome. And before Hermione can distract them and Arthur can get the group out of there to, stop an altercation between these children, Lucius walks up. And he starts talking shit to Arthur in front of his kids. And Arthur's not having it. And this is where that mindset that I mentioned earlier, when he said to Molly, hey, you don't think that I can take Lucius Malfoy? Well, he's ready to show that he can, because he begins to kick his ass, or try to. And I just noticed that in my notes I have a typo, and I spelled kick with an L, and that completely changes everything about this scene. Oh boy, we're gonna go ahead and fix that. Okay. Hagrid breaks it up, and Lucius gives Ginny her book back, that, the one that he was using to taunt her before the scuffle, because that's what grown adults should be doing to 11-year-old girls. From there, things settle down just a little bit, aside from Molly giving Arthur a bunch of shit about fighting in public in front of his children, which it's not the greatest look in the world, but I get it. If I'm honest, I get it. And good for him. Because, you know what? Lucius is a dick. And sometimes those people just need punched in the face. Hopefully my kid never listens to this, because that's a lesson that she shouldn't hear. Although, I gotta say that if she spends any time with my grandfather, she's gonna get that lesson anyways. His solution to being bullied was always aim for the tip of their nose, because if you can hit that spot, their eyes are gonna water, and it'll be worth it. Anyway, that's the chapter. It ends with Harry mentioning how he doesn't love traveling by flu powder, and who could blame him, really, after that experience? If you're just going to jump into burning flames and end up in a sketchy neighborhood, I don't think I'd enjoy it too much either. So, I guess that wraps up our chapter, and we should jump right into our